Beyond just the daily chores, the realities of health and education were pretty stark. Healthcare was far, far less advanced than our modern standards. Antibiotics were still in their absolute infancy, which meant a simple infection, something we cure today with a quick, totally taken-for-granted doctor's visit, could easily become life-threatening. Honestly, to someone from the 1920s, our modern medicine would seem like pure magic. Because of this harsh reality, infant mortality was significantly higher, and overall life expectancy was much lower. Education was also heavily limited. Instead of finishing high school, lots of kids actually left school at a really young age simply to help support their families, working on farms, in factories, or in local shops. Going off to university, that was an opportunity reserved for a...
Imagine just for a second waking up in Australia exactly 100 years ago. There are no smartphones buzzing beside your bed to wake you up. No internet connecting you to the rest of the globe. Absolutely no online banking. And yeah, definitely no late-night supermarkets for a quick grocery run. As we're going to see in this explainer, the world you'd step into is one that has been almost entirely overwritten by time. If you did somehow wake up a century ago, you'd quickly realize that life just moved at a completely different, much slower pace. For the vast majority of Australians back then, every single day wasn't about, optimizing productivity or scrolling through social feeds. It revolved entirely around hard, physical work, taking care of the family, and, well, basic survival. The everyday conveniences we don't even think twice about today, they simply didn't exist. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the 1920s starting line. A young nation relying on the land. To really grasp the massive leap we've made, we have to look at daily living back then. The sheer physical difference is honestly staggering. Australia was still very much a young nation. Most people lived in small towns or rural communities, rather than the sprawling urban centers we know today. Farming, mining, and manufacturing were the absolute backbone of the economy. Families were significantly larger, too. It was totally normal for multi-generational families to live right there under the exact same roof, sharing all the daily burdens and chores. And because electricity hadn't yet reached every single home, families relied heavily on kerosene lamps just to see at night and wood-fired stoves to cook their meals. And think about travel for a second. Owning a car was a massive luxury. You mostly traveled by horse, bicycle, or steam train. A simple trip that takes us, say, an hour in a car today could easily take an entire day back then. As for communication, forget instant texts. If you wanted to talk to a relative in another state, you wrote a letter and waited days or even weeks for it to arrive. Telephones existed, sure, but only a very small handful of households could actually afford one.
Beyond just the daily chores, the realities of health and education were pretty stark. Healthcare was far, far less advanced than our modern standards. Antibiotics were still in their absolute infancy, which meant a simple infection, something we cure today with a quick, totally taken-for-granted doctor's visit, could easily become life-threatening. Honestly, to someone from the 1920s, our modern medicine would seem like pure magic. Because of this harsh reality, infant mortality was significantly higher, and overall life expectancy was much lower. Education was also heavily limited. Instead of finishing high school, lots of kids actually left school at a really young age simply to help support their families, working on farms, in factories, or in local shops. Going off to university, that was an opportunity reserved for a very wealthy few.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Crisis and Global War, the catalysts for change. So how exactly did this heavily rural society transform? Well, it happened in some pretty dramatic steps. Step 1 was the absolute devastation of the 1930s Great Depression. Jobs disappeared almost overnight, businesses closed up shop, and thousands of Australian families were pushed into deep poverty, struggling literally just to put food on the table. It was undeniably one of the hardest economic periods in the nation's history. But Step 2 arrived just as the country was finally starting to recover, and that was World War II. Hundreds of thousands of Australians went off to serve in the military, while those on the home front worked tirelessly in factories, hospitals, and essential industries. And this leads us to Step 3, which is kind of the ironic result of this massive global conflict. The sheer scale of the war effort completely transformed Australia's economy and vastly accelerated its industrial growth.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next major shift. Section 3, the post-war boom, building a modern nation. During this explosive period of growth, a massive driver was a huge influx of new citizens. After the war ended, Australia didn't just recover. It entered one of the most phenomenal boom periods the country had ever seen. Millions of migrants arrived, first from Europe and later from Asia.
And they didn't just bring their rich cultures, they literally built the physical foundations of modern Australia. They helped construct the roads, the railways, the factories, and the schools. Australia's population grew at a rapid clip, and cities began expanding outward in every direction, creating those sprawling suburbs that really define Australian living today.
With this massive suburban boom came a complete revolution inside the home during the 1950s and 60s. Suddenly, televisions became common, acting as the central evening gathering point for families to watch the news and entertainment together. But even more importantly, new household appliances like refrigerators, washing machines, and electric ovens became the standard. Just think back to the wood stoves and intense manual labor of the 1920s. Suddenly, a literal machine was doing the scrubbing and the freezing for you. These new electrical appliances drastically reduced the immense amount of physical labor that daily life used to demand.
Which brings us to Section 4, the technology revolution, connecting to the world.
Once the grueling physical labor of the home was minimized, the groundwork was completely laid for an entirely new era. Just look at the snowballing speed of this tech timeline. In the 1980s, personal computers started entering homes. Just a decade later, in the 1990s, mobile phones appeared, totally unshackling communication from the living room wall. And then, from the 2000s onwards, the internet truly took hold, connecting Australians instantly to the entire globe. Suddenly, commerce, shopping, banking, and learning didn't require a long trip into town. It could all happen entirely from a desk at home, a real game changer. Which brings our explainer right up to today. Section 5, the modern Australian paradox, convenience versus new challenges. Today's Australia is almost completely unrecognizable compared to the country of a century ago. I mean, we have artificial intelligence answering our complex questions in mere seconds. And remote work is increasingly the standard, letting people work from basically anywhere with a Wi-Fi connection. We have these incredible modern triumphs. Medical technology allows Australians to live significantly longer and healthier lives. You can literally have your weekly groceries delivered instantly to your front door. But, as you might expect, these conveniences are sharply contrasted by some pretty stark modern costs. While life is physically much easier, the economic and social hurdles we face today are vastly different. These modern complexities are very, very real. There's been a dramatic rise in the cost of housing, making home ownership a much steeper climb than it was back in the post-war boom. General living expenses just continue to increase. Furthermore, the very technology that connects us globally means people often spend way more time looking at glowing screens than actually talking to each other face to face. As a result of all of this, stress, financial pressure, and mental health concerns have become far more prevalent than they were generations ago. It is the distinct, unavoidable trade-off for our highly advanced, hyper-connected lifestyle. And that leads us to Section 6, the next 100 years, an unwritten future. So looking back at this massive shift from kerosene lamps to artificial intelligence and from rural farming to remote digital work, we have to ask what this incredible 100-year transformation really teaches us. So the crucial point is captured perfectly in this thought. Every generation believes the world has finally reached its peak, only to discover that another wave of change is just around the corner. The Australia our grandparents and great-grandparents knew, it has completely disappeared. And the Australia we know today will absolutely continue to evolve in ways we can barely even imagine right now. It is truly mind-bending when you compare the two eras side by side. 100 years ago, Australians were merely dreaming about having basic utilities, electricity, running water inside the home, and reliable transport to the next town. Today, we live in a literal sci-fi reality of AI and instant global connection. And honestly, we take it completely for granted most days. The future is arriving faster than ever before, and Australia's story is still being written every single day. If the leap from horse-drawn carriages to global instant internet took just a century, what in the world will the next 100 years bring? It's a fascinating question to ponder. If you found this journey through time as incredible as I did, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications so you never miss our next explainer. Thanks so much for joining me to learn something new today, and I'll catch you next time.